The sixth round of the China-India Strategic Economic Dialogue has taken place, bringing the prospect of further negotiations on policy coordination, infrastructure building, high-tech industries, energy, and other important areas of cooperation between these two Asian giants. As economic and social reform in both China and India meet challenges, the ongoing global trade war only increases pressure. So where is the dialogue heading? How will reforms overcome obstacles to new growth? And how will the complex dragon and elephant dance influence regional development and stability? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Gautam Bambawali, former India ambassador to China. In the second part of the program, we will speak to Rong Ying, Vice President and Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. Atul Aneja, Associate Editor of The Hindu. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Well, September the 10th is a Teacher's Day, and we know that education is an important area for the two sides to exchange experiences. And we are so impressed by the success of India in delivering very brilliant and successful scientists as well as senior business executives, either in India or the United States, for example. Can we, on this particular day, share some of the experiences of the week that can inspire China?
Sure. I must tell you, Mr. Yang, that I retired from the Indian diplomatic service at the end of last year in 2018. And since then, I have been a teacher myself.
Happy Teacher's Day to you.
Thank you so much. I've been distinguished professor at a university called the Symbiosis International University in Western India, in the city of Pune, not far from Mangmai, from Bombay. And we are here in Beijing, and later we go to Wuhan, basically to step up cooperation between our university and Chinese universities, and we are doing that very successfully. I'm very happy to do this because it ties in with our government's views to step up people-to-people contacts and relations between our two countries. I think there need to be more students going each way and more teachers also. To come to your question about the Indian education system, I think what is good about it is that it moves with the times. We are already thinking about how the future of work will be impacted due to changes in technology. And as we do this, we stay ahead of the times to the extent possible. We work with other people and other universities and other professors across the world, and we try to keep our own education system in line with changing times and changing technology. I think that's the secret. It's no great secret, but that's what we do.
To be honest, as the two biggest developing countries, India and China have good reasons to be mutual teachers for each other. We teach each other, we share our experiences in shaping the roadmap of development.
Sure.
In the case of India, we have a lot to learn, for example. Now, having said this, we both have a formidable presence of the middle class, whose demands for social change and economic development would be insatiable and hard to gauge in the near future. So, what can you do to shape the perceptions of the middle class in examining, for example, whether China will make a friend or be potentially a threat to the national security of India, given our historical memories?
No, that's an excellent question. And let me say that I have now been living in India permanently for the last 10 months after I returned from Beijing. And I see that there is no animosity towards China in the people of India. The ordinary person on the street looks at China with admiration for all the successes that China has achieved in economic growth and development, and which it continues to develop and as it continues to grow. And we believe that there are certain things that India could learn from China. There may be some things that, that China could learn from India too. But I think here is where we require greater interaction, not only between our two governments, but also between our businesses and most importantly between the people of India and China. And I think all of us have understood that this last aspect has been a little bit of a weak link in India-China relations. We need to step up tourism, cooperation in education, cooperation in the film sphere, between our two countries. And then we will understand each other better, and we will be able to learn from each other.
We appreciate your sense of humility, by the way, and 4 decades of development for China since the late 1970s has been a learning curve. We have experienced the setbacks, but of course the rapid expansion of the economy in our country is a miracle. At the same time, we serve as the powerhouse for the world economic recovery. Having said this, let's look at the implications of the latest mandate that the Prime Minister Modi has won through the second campaign success. What does the mandate actually mean for the economic prospects of India?
Yeah. I think what the mandate means is that the people of India have been very satisfied with the way Prime Minister Modi governed India in his first term between 2014 and 2019. The second mandate was an even bigger mandate than he had in 2014, which means that the people of India want him to continue doing what he has been doing, especially in the economic sphere. One of the big economic reforms that Prime Minister Modi did in his first tenure, in his first term, was implementing the goods and services tax, which means that there is one tax for goods and services across the country. That is going to have a big impact on India's economy. And the big mandate that he has won in 2019 means that the people of India want him to continue down this road of economic reforms, whether it is in labor reform, whether it is making business easier to perform and to do in India. I think this is the direction in which his government will be moving in the coming months and in the coming years.
Given the dynamics of deglobalization, particularly the rise of populism under the Trump administration, both countries are facing the downward economic pressure. China especially faces the immediate issue of unemployment, for example, and financial risks systematically. I'd like to also understand what's happening in India, for example, between the government and the market. There have been policy debates among the middle class, the policymakers, in particular in China, as to what can be done to maintain equilibrium between the state-owned enterprises and the private economy. The raging debates have been going on, and I'd like to know whether Prime Minister Modi is also viewed as a strong man. His strong leadership will help navigate your economy more easily. And India is proud of being the most populous democracy at the same time.
That's an interesting question, and I must inform you and your viewers that just as there is a slowdown in the GDP growth of China, there has been a slowdown in the Indian economy too. Our rate of GDP growth, the quarterly rate, has come down slightly to about 5.5%, and this is a worry for the government of Prime Minister Modi. What we are witnessing in India is that there is no longer the kind of investment which was coming forward, not only by public companies but also by private sector companies. And we need to change the rules of doing business in India to encourage private and public companies to invest more in the economy, to invest more in their own companies. And this is something which I think the government of Prime Minister Modi is trying to tackle and is focusing on right now.
The global environment for doing business is not quite in favor of our domestic agenda. Look at Iran and the trade war between the United States and China.
Yeah.
I wonder if India could still be able to maintain a balanced relationship between Washington, Iran, and Beijing.
Yeah. No, I think where the relationship between the United States and China and India is concerned, let me say very clearly on your program that as we move forward in the next few decades of the 21st century, this triangular relationship is going to be the most important relationship for the globe, not only in the economic side but also in the political side. As far as India is concerned, India will pursue its own national interests. We will not be taking sides between the United States on the one hand or China on the other. But at the same time, we will take positions on certain important domestic, regional and global issues, depending on what India's interest is. And some of the times we may find that India and China are on the same side of an issue. At other times you might find India and the United States being on the same side of an issue. But that is because we are following our own national interest, not because we are siding with one country or the other. But I end my presentation here to you, Mr. Yang, by saying that as we move ahead beyond 2020 into the next 30 years of this 21st century, this triangular relationship between China, the United States and India, which will be the three largest economies in the world, they already are on purchasing power parity methodology, will be the most important triangular relationship between nations.
What we look at here about the agenda concerning the sixth round of strategic economic dialogue between our two countries is, by the end of the day, a matter of whether we have more competition or cooperation, more competition or cooperation, because that will define the future of the two countries.
Yeah.
Now, for example, let's look at the regional issues. Do you think we have a third party that tends to derail a healthy development of the bilateral ties between New Delhi and Beijing?
Yeah. No, as far as the relationship between our two great countries are concerned, India and China, there is no doubt that when there are two large countries like us, we cannot have identical views on all subjects under the sun. We may have identical views on some issues, we may not agree with each other on other issues. But what is happening now in the first half of the 21st century is that India and China are beginning to regain their former status in the global economy and polity. India and China, right up till the end of the 17th century, were the two largest economies in the world. And we are now beginning to become two of the largest economies in the world. And that is a process which no one can stop. It will continue. In this process, there will be some areas of competition between India and China. There will be many areas of cooperation between India and China. I personally believe that the cooperation will outweigh the differences, but we will have to work on our differences as well as working on areas of cooperation.
We are both clearly aware of the changes in the power equation, and India is catching up very quickly. However, one major obstacle that gets in the way between an improvement between our two countries is the trade deficit.
Yeah.
Since the early 1990s, volume of trade between the two economies has been increasing rapidly. Sure. But what are the structural reasons behind the huge trade deficit, which is currently in favor of China? Yeah. And what can be done by the second term, or in the second term of Prime Minister Modi, to quickly close the gap?
Yeah. I think the trade deficit is based in the composition of trade between India and China. India is exporting to China mainly primary products, agricultural products, whereas China is exporting to India finished goods like electronic goods, electrical equipment, iron and steel, etc. So that is why the composition of trade dictates a trade deficit. I think what we need to do is go beyond the balance of trade. Where India can make up all this is, one, by exporting more software to China. And there I think we need to work together to reduce some of the barriers to increasing such export of software from India to China. Two, I think India must work towards attracting more Chinese tourists from your country to our country. Chinese people are traveling all over the world. The number of tourists going to India is just 200,000 per year. I want to increase it from 200,000 to 2 million a year, which I think is doable if we focus on this. And once we do that, I think we will be able to overcome these problems of the trade deficit.
I'm wondering what policy options could be made by the Modi administration in the second term on the following issues. For example, border disputes, Tibet, BRI, and Pakistan. A no-weather friend of China. I wonder if the Indian government will adopt a constructive approach in shaping a new policy towards these regional issues.
I think of all the issues you mentioned, the one which is the most important between India and China is the boundary issue. If we can sort out our boundary problems, I think then India and China would have reduced the big difference between them. I also believe that the fact that Prime Minister Modi has been voted to office with such a huge majority and increased number of seats in Parliament compared to 2014 and the fact that we have a very strong leader, not just in India, but also here in China. President Xi Jinping is a very, very strong and popular leader. I think this is the time when India and China should accelerate the process of finding a boundary resolution between our two countries.
Mutual trust does take time to build.
Sure.
But the BJP is known for its strong nationalistic stance. And that, of course, serves to lay the groundwork for the support of Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah.
In this context, do you think it will be more difficult for peoples in both countries to reach consensus and to build the consensus that a peaceful solution, a political one, is badly needed instead of having what we experienced in Doklam crisis?
No, I would say that whatever the nature of the government in India, whichever political party is in office, and right now it is the BJP with Prime Minister Modi in charge, I think any government of India is very practical and will have a very practical approach to relations with China. I believe that both India and China must take a very close look at the boundary issue between them and move forward with the leadership of our two countries, with their guidance, to resolve this problem between us. And if we move quickly and if we move in a practical way, as you have also said, we will be able to sort this problem out. And the sooner it is resolved, the better it will be for the growth of India-China relations.
What do you think of the growing influence of China in your neighboring countries like Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan in particular? We have the Hambantota and the Gwadar. All of these things may have been an important part of your agenda in shaping the China policy.
Yeah. No, let me put it this way, that India has its own influence in its neighboring countries, and China, which is a big and growing, developing, a big economy, a growing power, also has its influence. So we don't really see anything out of the ordinary here. I would only like to pick out of all the countries you mentioned in India's neighborhood, one, which is our western neighbor, Pakistan. We would like to see China taking a more balanced approach between Pakistan and India. We believe that in the past, China has taken a more balanced approach. It has always said that the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan are for those two countries to sort out and to resolve. I look forward to China going back to that position rather than taking a more forward-leaning position.
And do you think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will improve its function in providing a better platform for Pakistan, India, Russia and China to address issues of common concern?
Look, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a very important platform, and India is very happy to be a part of it. You're absolutely right, Pakistan is also a part of it. We could talk to each other in that setting. But as far as Pakistan and India are concerned, I think it is for those two countries to sort out their issues on their own.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate your insightful analysis.
Thank you so much.
That's the end of our first part of the program with the former Indian ambassador, Mr. Gautam Bambawela. When we come back, I'll be joined by Mr. Atul Aneja and Mr. Rong Ying, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are very happy to be joined in the second half of the program by Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. Atul Aneja, Associate Editor of The Hindu. I'd like to know your thoughts, Atul, about the consensus that was built at the landmark Wuhan summit in the wake of the Doklam crisis. What is the consensus that the politicians on both sides share in shaping a common future?
I think at the end of the day, the consensus is that both countries realize, and both leaders very self-consciously articulate, that we are civilizational states. Now that is a very important, not only a philosophical, but I think that's a doctrinal understanding. It's the DNA, identity of the two countries. Now when you see yourself as civilizational states, you look not at the immediate, not at balance of power, not at the power equations which we are used to in the Western discourse, but we look into our far history and draw our inspiration from a deep spiritual and a cultural bond which we have had, and then start building on it. So your positioning, your reference points are very different. That, I think, to me was the main takeaway of the Wuhan summit, because you're thinking differently. You're thinking very independently, and you're thinking collaboration, and you're thinking ways of how to find solutions to the problems. The problems remain, border, etc., etc. But the approach is not the balance of power. It is not the Western approach, but very quintessentially Eastern approach, which we have derived from our own far history.
I believe the audiences of the dialogue must have been impressed by the aspirational nature of your confidence and vision about the future. Having said this, let's look at what Mr. Jaishankar, who was a foreign secretary until his retirement last year, said. He was an influential advisor to Prime Minister Modi on diplomacy during his first years in power. What do you think of the diplomatic strategy that Prime Minister Modi has in his mind in the second term, Mr. Rong?
Well, of course, Ambassador Minister Jaishankar is a highly respected and senior diplomat. And by the way, he's also, I think, possibly the only sort of professional diplomat turned into a minister. So it's a great, I think, honor. Certainly, I think the recognition of his contribution and influence that has been made for the administration, for Prime Minister Modi and his party. And for him, of course, there are many, I guess, issues on his top agenda. For me, I think the most important thing, as far as I can see, is to sort of create a favorable environment, external environment for India to achieve its ambition, to achieve its vision. That's now, I think, which is known as the New India sort of vision. And for that, it needs to have a stable relationship, particularly, I think, with major countries like the United States and China. And for that, I think, as we have just seen, well, your previous, I mean, the first part of the interview with Ambassador Bambawali, that it is continue to pursue a kind of a policy that serve the best interest of India, to which China, I think, understand, of course. But the question is, of course, in the process of doing that, I think China and India would have to continue to work hard to promote where they, I think, they share, and in the meantime manage the differences, if there are differences or any differences, in a constructive way, as I said, and I think as Ambassador Bambawali has also alluded.
What are the major differences that the two governments would have to take a second look, and they need to be more realistic about this?
Yeah, so major differences, if you look at issues, you have to realize that the border issue has to be resolved. I mean, that's one difference between the two countries. We have so far been pursuing what are called confidence building measures, that just in case there is a face-off, how do we sort of diffuse tensions? But you've got to move beyond hotlines between commanders and people at the forward locations to something more fundamental. And I think this is the time to finally look at a resolution, the starting of the process of a resolution. Look at all the three sectors which are under contention. If you recall, Foreign Minister and State Counsel Wang Yi, during his meeting with Mr. Jaishankar, talked about early harvest prospects. Now, he did not define it, but probably there are certain areas on the border which are more easily resolvable than other hard areas. So we need to start the process, go beyond CBMs. I think that's one very important thing. The second thing is, on the economic side, I see such a fantastic, I was recently in Shanghai, and we had top tech companies of China, like SenseTime, who are into AI cutting edge stuff, and you had Indian software companies trying to come together. A massive opportunity arising because we generate huge data from Chinese population and Indian population, which can generate solutions for smart cities, for variety of things, healthcare. There are so many issues. These are new areas which I see are coming quite spontaneously in the India-China equation.
You mean a close partnership for the IT industry will help ease the trade deficit?
Well, not only just ease the trade deficit, but as a joint venture, is the two emerging economies become massive exporters, especially to developing countries. So you make money together. You go beyond a trade relationship, but a relationship of economic partnership in the IT and high-tech sphere. In fact, that links to the basic trade war which is happening on high-tech against China. I think India and China, Chinese hardware, Indian software, can be on the cutting edge of technological development, the Industry 4.0 area. This is something I think which is underappreciated, but which is happening. We are talking already on this, not through the government dictates, but the private sectors of the two countries.
I'm sweetly surprised at what Mr. Nadia describes in characterizing the strategic cooperation between the high-tech industries of the two economies. In the age of globalization, it's impossible to have the real independence. You need to look at the ecosystem. You need to look at the global supply chain. And India, do you think it will come across as a very important partner in the area of software?
Indeed, I think there's always been a big, huge, actually, complementarities between China and India. Remember, back in 2000, I think, or earlier, before, when the former Premier Zhou Rongji visited, I think first visited India, there were the famous sort of remarks made by him. They say China at that time was the #1 in hardware, and India was the #1 in software. So if China and Indians join hands, we could be the #1 globally. So the complementarity is always there. In the current, circumstances, where if you look at the trade dispute between China and the United States, I think what impacts the China and India most is the kind of way that in United States to address the trade dispute in a unilateral way, in a way through protectionism. That is, I think, the biggest impact. Not only, bring damage, undermine the trade relationship between China and the United States, India and the United States. By nature, it's mutually beneficial, but impacts the norms and the rules that have been undergird the international trading system. That is, I think, China and India are working very hard on that. On the specific issues, the collaboration on high tax, this is something I think China and India continue to work on. I'm glad that our India colleagues.
Very quickly, what do you want to add?
I want to say that what's happening is the philosophical element. We are looking at modernization without westernization. Whether it is in the field of environment, whether it is in the field of renewable energy, that we modernize. But for us, the template is not the Western template. We modernize in our civilizational ethos. While we go modern, we are strongly rooted in our tradition. I think this is something which has happened with Modi, and I see it increasingly happening as I travel through China.
That's indeed a very important point in promoting a better understanding about what India aims to achieve in the near future. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.